Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project. More specifically, this instance fulfilling your guys' request to see some RetroArch tests on MiSTer FPGA. And spoiler alert, it's going to be a little bit of a rough ride. This is just a proof of concept. I'm going to be talking about what it does and more specifically what it doesn't do, because this thing definitely can be very temperamental. Not only getting signal, you got to be down at 720p, but just getting games to run or even at any sort of full speed. But this is something that technically the hardware on the DE10 or clones can do, so I wanted to take a look at it after we'd kind of talked about it previously on the channel. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, got a Patreon link down below as well. But while RetroArch and emulation may run on MiSTer FPGA, you have to decide whether or not running is as good as playing well. That kind of is the reality of most of the games tested here. They will run, they will do something, they will show some sort of video signal, but after that it's going to be a little bit of a janky experience. Now this is not something that I am releasing, I'm not putting a link up, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But as we jump into something like Golden Axe or Revenge of Death Adder, the first thing you're going to notice, at least when you're running this, is that the aspect ratio is just going to force itself to 16:9. Now I will fix that in post and kind of get it down to a more constrained aspect ratio so it would look normal, but if you can't tell already, this game is not running at full speed and that shadow has a lot of corruption in it. Kind of, if you didn't look too closely, it would look like Golden Axe or Revenge of Death Adder, a core that we do not have on MiSTer FPGA, but honestly there's nothing here where I would recommend this is the type of experience you want to play. Now the reason that this is not something that I'm just going to link to as far as the download is concerned is because when you're actually running this, your MiSTer FPGA is going to get hotter than I think it should. A big thanks to Andy D, our West Coast correspondent. He captured all this footage and reported back to me just how hot that MiSTer FPGA got. And that's just down to the fact that it's pinning the ARM cores to try to get this thing to run at any sort of full speed, and it's just running those ARM cores faster and more intense than anything that MiSTer FPGA is going to do. And while you will get sound output in some of the games, it's not going to be the best experience. Here's a soundtrack sample. It's not going to hurt your ears. There's no issues. It's just garbled, and I'll be right back. Now it goes without saying clearly that that's not what Golden Axe Revenge of Death Adder is supposed to sound like on emulation, and obviously not on real hardware, and that is the reality of trying to run RetroArch and different emulation cores on MiSTer FPGA. For the most part you're going to get some sort of result, but it's not going to be a result that is going to be up to par for you to actually enjoy playing a game. And because this uses very old versions of the emulation, you're going to see a lot of bugs that you would just not see in MAME current, because you'll see here as soon as we beat this mid-boss, you're supposed to go to the sprite scaling area, and that becomes instantaneously corrupted. This effect is not within the version of MAME that's even going to run on this build of RetroArch. So for the most part, games are just going to be much worse than if you just downloaded MAME current and ran it on a potato PC. And considering emulation boxes, software emulation handhelds, and Raspberry Pi 4s and 5s are just basically so cheap these days, depending on your budget, there really wouldn't be any reason that I would point to MiSTer FPGA to say you could do it here too, because while it is technically possible, the performance you're getting is just going to be a letdown for almost every single game on this list. Right now we're playing G.I. Joe from Konami, and at least this one does have some discernible sound that is close to the arcade board, so it's going to be the second soundtrack sample. Go ahead and listen and hear if you think this audio is accurate or if it's still having issues, and I'll be right back with a lot more. Obviously that was a trick question because that doesn't sound accurate either, but it is a little bit cleaner than the Golden Axe Revenge of Death Adder example, and this is one at least on some of the scaling effects, even though it's completely separate hardware to what Sega ran for the Revenge of Death Adder, it does look more accurate, and that's kind of going to be the result you get here. Some games are going to run close to full speed, and they will look pretty close to what they're supposed to look like. Other games are going to be an absolute slideshow with a ton of graphical corruption, and even more games aren't going to boot whatsoever, because again, this is using a very old version of MAME, so even even if this was running on something like MiSTer FPGA, you'd really have to get it upgraded to the most recent version, or as close as you could get on something like the tiny OS that's running here. And sometimes you're just going to get absolute garbage on the screen. You can see all of that graphical corruption in the background on all of that different artwork. And this is the reality of something like RetroArch. It is extremely difficult to set up and get running on MiSTer FPGA, and all of that work is going to render out something that really isn't doing all that much of anything. Let's move over to Street Fighter 3 Second Impact and see how that is working on MiSTer FPGA as far as the ARM cores are concerned. It will run up until a point in time, and you might not be able to tell quite yet, but this is not running anywhere near full speed. Not sure what Taki Udon did when he got Third Strike running around 60 frames per second, but it's not something that was able to actually happen in Second Impact here. So this definitely wouldn't be something that is playable, and that really is throughout these entire tests what I am finding and seeing in the footage, and even playing around with it a little bit before I did the voiceover myself. Basically, there is no game that I would just sit down and say, this is a playable experience. I can sit on my couch and play it on MiSTer FPGA until an arcade core comes around in FPGA code. If you want to run software emulation for MAME or Final Burn Neo, you'd be better off using basically any other piece of hardware you have sitting around, or even buying a cheap Raspberry Pi 4 and just running it that way. The experience is going to be much smoother, the front end is going to be much nicer, the setup process is going to be much easier for you to deal with, and you're just going to end up having a lot more fun than you would if you sat around on MiSTer FPGA. Leave me a comment down below and you tell me, do you want me to try to actually get more modern emulators in here into a tiny OS build with RetroArch running? I am willing to try it to see if I can do this for everyone, but there are two caveats to that. One, I don't have all the time in the world, and two, if I test it and I find that the MiSTer FPGA is getting hotter than I like, it's nothing that I would give to anyone, because I don't want to be responsible for someone just leaving this thing running for 3 to 4 hours with no fan on their MiSTer FPGA or no heat sink into an aluminum case. Because we don't want this thing running fully pegged and at full speed and generating all that heat for that much time. Obviously, on the MiSTer FPGA side of things, heat dissipation has never been an issue for that Cyclone 5 chip and the ARM cores inside of it. You'll see there, it just basically crashed completely when it tried to get into a fight on Second Impact. Now, this is footage from Final Burn Neo, and this is what it should be running as. So you'll see, again, if you wanted to play something like CPS III on RetroArch on MiSTer FPGA until we actually have an FPGA core, you're just not really going to be able to pull it off. I know the idea of being able to run every single game that MAME runs and Final Burn Neo runs until we get an FPGA core is an exciting concept, but unfortunately that's not what you're going to be getting if you actually try to do it. If you do find a game that runs at full speed and seems relatively playable, you kind of found the needle in the haystack, because trust me, there's not many needles and there is a metric shit ton of hay going on right now. Let's move over to one of the most ridiculous games ever. JJ Squawkers might not even be the best game ever. It's kind of janky, but this is one that's running relatively perfectly in RetroArch. Obviously, it's still persisting to 16:9. I just left this aspect ratio because it's colorful and kind of looked nice. But this, of all the tests that Andy D did, was the only game that even seemed to want to run in any way, shape, or form, to the point where I could point to it and say, yeah, that's pretty playable. And it had some decent music as well, so go ahead and listen for like 35 seconds or so, and I'll come back and show you a little bit more about the testing of RetroArch and why I don't think it's going to work. But enjoy. Decent audio in this instance is a bit of a misnomer. You can identify it as music, but obviously it doesn't seem to be running at the right rate, and it definitely has a lot of corruption in it. But as far as the gameplay of JJ Squawkers is concerned, it seems to be running full speed here in RetroArch. But the reality is, running RetroArch on the Triassic DE10 Nano or any of its clones is basically just a party trick. It's not something that you're going to want to try out every single time. It's not something for 99 out of 100 games that is even going to be a desirable thing to do. If you want to run something like MAME or Final Burn motherboard Neo on MiSTer FPGA, I would just buy a Raspberry Pi 5 and duct tape it to your MiSTer FPGA case and switch your controller USB in from one to the other when you want to play something like MAME, because even if you spent 6 months or a year trying to develop this, you're just going to end up with a massive library of games that will not run whatsoever. That's either down to the emulation being too old or the fact that the ARM cores can't keep up and run it at full speed. It is fun to kind of play around with what else could work on MiSTer FPGA, and I know a lot of people were excited of the concept of this, but honestly, in testing and trying to use this, it really just is a completely janky experience, and that's not down to anybody who made this, it's just down to the fact that the hardware isn't set up to run something like this. It would be fun maybe on a future board, something like a MiSTer 2, if we could use those ARM cores to run something like MAME or Final Burn Neo until the cores exist, because we'd have higher clocks on the ARM CPU cores. But right now on the DE10 Nano, it just really isn't a thing that's going to achieve any sort of results that you're going to want to spend any time working on. And this setup and getting it running isn't the easiest thing in the world, and I mean this nicely, but I deal with technical stuff all day long, as does Andy D, and I would say maybe 9 out of 10 of my commenters are just going to get stuck in the setup process and have questions, and because this would be a completely unsupported thing, there'd be no support in the community to actually help you if it wasn't running. It would just be kind of down to you to figure it out or give up on it, and I really don't mean that in a mean way, it's just the reality. This is why it probably hasn't shown up on MiSTer FPGA up until this point in time, because even if someone releases it and says it's unsupported, do whatever you want with it, people are going to go to the Discord server and to different forums and ask for help on something that never was supposed to work in the first place. But you guys wanted to see RetroArch running on MiSTer FPGA. We've done the test, we've got the footage, and I would say it just isn't ready for prime time and probably never will be. If you have any questions, leave them down below, but I'm done. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.